This story contains themes of crime, psychological suspense, and moral ambiguity. Listener discretion is advised. David Miller had always believed in the power of precision. He built his life like a Swiss watch. Intricate, flawless, every cog turning in perfect synchronicity. His career as a celebrated architect, his meticulously curated loft in downtown Chicago, his seemingly effortless charm, all were testaments to a life under absolute control. But his greatest masterpiece, the one that truly defined his genius, was not a skyscraper or an urban park. It was an alibi, an unassailable diamond-hard alibi, forged in the crucible of his own brilliant, calculating mind. He leaned back in his leather armchair, a glass of aged scotch glinting amber in the dim light of his living room. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious. It had been exactly 72 hours since it happened, since the world of Sarah Jenkins, his former business partner, had been irrevocably altered, or more accurately, ended. And in those 72 hours, David had watched the news cycles spin, the police sirens wail, the frantic speculation ripple through social media. He had watched it all from a comfortable distance, a serene smile playing on his lips, because he couldn't have done it. He simply couldn't have. His alibi was a work of art, a meticulous tapestry woven from verifiable facts, digital footprints, and human observation. On the night Sarah vanished, the night her apartment building's security cameras mysteriously glitched and her phone went dark, David had been 300 miles away, attending an exclusive architectural symposium in St. Louis. He'd booked his flight weeks in advance, paid with a credit card linked to his professional expense account. He checked into the luxurious Peabody Hotel, leaving a clear trail of room service orders and spa appointments. He'd attended every keynote speech, every networking event, engaging in conversations with prominent figures who could easily vouch for his presence. There were photographs too, candid shots shared on LinkedIn by fellow attendees, featuring David smiling, engaged, undeniably there. His phone records placed him firmly in Missouri. His rental car agreement, his purchases at the hotel gift shop, even the subtle shift in his social media activity, a post about the symposium, a comment on a colleague's presentation, all painted a picture of a man fully immersed in his professional obligations, utterly disconnected from the tragic events unfolding back in Chicago. He had even, with a stroke of genius, made a point of having a late-night, in-depth discussion with a respected academic, Dr. Evelyn Reed, about the future of sustainable urban design. Their conversation had stretched well past midnight, giving him a solid, intelligent, and unimpeachable witness. Dr. Reed, a woman of impeccable reputation, would never lie, and David had simply been too charming, too insightful to forget. It was perfect, too perfect perhaps for anyone to question. That was the beauty of it. No panicked rush, no last-minute scrambling. Every detail had been pre-planned, every contingency accounted for, long before Sarah Jenkins became an inconvenience. He had anticipated every possible line of inquiry, every forensic tool, every detective's suspicious gaze. His alibi had been built not just to withstand scrutiny, but to defy it. It was a fortress of facts, impenetrable and absolute. He took a slow sip of scotch, the warmth spreading through him. The news anchor on the muted television screen was discussing the ongoing investigation into Sarah's disappearance, her serious expression a stark contrast to David's inner calm. No body had been found, not yet, but the police were treating it as a probable homicide. They would be looking for a motive, a connection, a lapse. They would find none to him. Then a flicker, not on the screen but in his mind, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in the bedrock of his certainty. It was a memory, a fleeting image from the symposium. He'd been in the hotel lobby, waiting for Dr. Reed to join him for their late-night discussion. He remembered checking his watch, then pulling out his phone, idly scrolling through an article about a new building project in Dubai. And then a moment, a brief, almost imperceptible moment. His gaze drifted to the framed photograph on his credenza, a vibrant, bustling street scene of Chicago, taken from a high vantage point. A gift from Sarah years ago before things had soured. He felt nothing looking at it now, no remorse, no lingering regret. Only the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced at the caller ID. It was Detective Reynolds. David picked it up, his voice smooth, untroubled. "Detective, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Mr. Miller." Reynolds' voice was clipped, professional. We're just following up on a few details regarding Sarah Jenkins. We understand you were out of town last week. That's correct, Detective. St. Louis. Architectural Symposium. I believe I mentioned it to the officer who initially called. David's tone was polite, cooperative. He was prepared for this. He had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in his head. Right. And you flew, correct? From O'Hare. Yes, O'Hare to Lambert St. Louis International. Flight 217 American Airlines. Departed 6:45 p.m. last Tuesday. He rattled off the details effortlessly, as if reciting a grocery list. There was a pause on the other end, a beat too long. And when you landed, Mr. Miller, did you immediately head to the hotel? Of course. My rental car was pre-booked. I picked it up, drove straight to the Peabody, checked in, and went to a networking reception. I can provide the receipts if you like. We have those, thank you. Just confirming. One last thing, Mr. Miller. Your phone records show a brief data spike, a download just before your flight departed. Just a few megabytes. Any idea what that might have been? David's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. A data spike? Before his flight. He had been so careful with his phone, making sure all his digital activity aligned with his travel. He had meticulously purged his browsing history, cleared his cache, ensuring nothing could place him anywhere but where he was supposed to be. A few megabytes, what could it have been? A news update? An email syncing? He couldn't recall anything specific. It was insignificant. It had to be. A data spike? David feigned a slight chuckle, a touch of dismissive amusement. Probably just an app updating in the background, Detective. Or perhaps I downloaded a podcast for the flight. I don't pay much attention to such trivial things. I was focused on getting to my gate. Right. Trivial. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Miller. We appreciate your cooperation. Reynolds' voice was still professional, but David detected a subtle shift, a barely audible inflection that suggested doubt, or perhaps curiosity. He hung up, the calm in his chest suddenly replaced by a faint tremor. A data spike. A few megabytes. It was nothing. A glitch in the matrix of his perfect alibi. An anomaly so small, so utterly inconsequential that it was beneath notice. And yet the detective had noticed. He had asked. David rose, walked to the window, and looked out at the glittering cityscape. The lights of 1,000 lives, each one a story, a secret. His secret, however, was supposed to be invisible, untraceable. He had accounted for every major variable, every logical step. He had built an alibi that was flawless, impenetrable, a testament to his unmatched intellect. But what if perfection itself was the flaw? What if the absence of human error, the sheer, unblemished precision, was the very thing that would expose him? What if that tiny forgotten data spike was not an app update, but a single misplaced thread in his otherwise perfect tapestry, a thread that could unravel everything? That microscopic anomaly, that single seemingly random blip in a sea of perfectly orchestrated data, was the very crack Arthur Vance had believed impossible. He had meticulously crafted his alibi, a digital fortress around his actions, each bite a brick in a wall of unassailable truth. Every smart home device, every online interaction, every minute of his evening had been accounted for, woven into a narrative so seamless, so utterly mundane, that no one could possibly question it. The night he ended Robert Maxwell's life, Arthur had felt an almost euphoric calm. He'd planned it for months, anticipating every variable, every potential pitfall. Robert, his former business partner, a man whose ambition had become a corrosive force, had threatened to expose Arthur's carefully constructed financial empire. Arthur couldn't allow that. He'd made sure his presence at Robert's secluded estate was brief, surgical, leaving no physical trace. Then he'd return to his own minimalist, hyper-connected smart home, slipping back into his perfectly crafted persona, a man immersed in a quiet evening of work and leisure. He remembered the satisfaction as he settled into his ergonomic office chair, the soft hum of the air purifier, the ambient lighting shifting to a warm amber. His laptop hummed to life, a cloud document open, reflecting the late-night work he'd supposedly been engaged in for hours. A video call with a colleague in a different time zone was scheduled for later, another layer of digital proof. His smart thermostat maintained a precise 72 degrees Fahrenheit. His smart security cameras dutifully recorded the empty exterior of his property, and his streaming service logged the obscure documentary he'd ostensibly been engrossed in. Arthur Vance was home, and the digital world confirmed it, minute by minute, second by second. He'd even timed his shower, his snack breaks, his online browsing, all fitting a predictable, unvarying pattern. The next morning, the news channels erupted. Robert Maxwell found dead in his study. The police converged on Robert's sprawling estate, a hive of activity that Arthur watched unfold from the detached calm of his living room, a cup of artisanal coffee warming his hands. He practiced a look of appropriate shock, a flicker of genuine sadness for the cameras he knew would eventually seek him out. When Detective Mark Miller arrived at his doorstep later that day, Arthur was ready. Miller was a man whose face seemed etched with years of unanswered questions, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He didn't waste time with small talk. He spoke of Robert with a quiet reverence, then shifted to the practicalities. Arthur, outwardly composed, offered his condolences, expressed his shock, and then with practiced ease recounted his evening. He had been working late, he explained, on a complex financial report. He'd taken a break to watch a documentary, exchanged a few emails, and then had a scheduled video conference call with his team in Asia. He even offered to provide his laptop, his phone, and access to his smart home logs. "Anything to help," he'd said, his voice steady, earnest. Miller listened, his gaze unblinking. He nodded at the right moments, scribbled notes in a small leather-bound pad. He asked about Arthur's relationship with Robert, about any recent disagreements, about Robert's enemies. Arthur answered with careful ambiguity, painting Robert as a brilliant but sometimes difficult man, making sure to mention a few other individuals who might have had reason to resent him. He was a master of misdirection, a puppeteer pulling invisible strings. The interview concluded, and Arthur felt a surge of triumph. Miller had seemed impressed, almost convinced. The detective had thanked him for his cooperation and left, promising to be in touch if anything else came up. Arthur allowed himself a small, private smile. The perfect alibi. Unbreakable. But Detective Miller, back at the precinct, felt a nagging unease. He'd seen plenty of alibis in his career, some airtight, some full of holes. Arthur Vance's was almost too perfect. It was like a machine-generated account, devoid of the usual human quirks, the small forgetfulness, the minor inconsistencies that always crept into genuine recollections. People rarely remembered every minute detail of a mundane evening, let alone had a digital footprint to back it up. Arthur's account was a flawless mirror of his digital life. Felt manufactured. "I need everything on Arthur Vance," Miller told his team. "Every digital crumb. His smart home logs, his phone records, his computer activity, his streaming history, his fitness tracker data, the works. And I mean everything. The more mundane, the better." A young digital forensics analyst named Emily was assigned to Arthur Vance's smart home data. Emily was a whiz kid, a prodigy with a knack for spotting patterns and anomalies in vast datasets. She spent days sifting through terabytes of information, temperature logs from every room, motion sensor activations, light dimmer settings, appliance power consumption, network traffic, even the subtle fluctuations in voltage across Arthur's meticulously wired home. It was a digital ghost of Arthur's life, a perfect, unchanging rhythm. Then she found it. It was almost nothing. A blip so small, so fleeting that it could easily be dismissed as a sensor error, a network hiccup, or just background noise. In the smart thermostat's detailed environmental logs for Arthur's study, precisely at 11:47 p.m., there was a fractional momentary dip in the temperature reading. It wasn't a sustained drop, just a single data point, a flicker that registered 71.8 degrees Fahrenheit for less than 3 seconds before immediately returning to the program's 72.0 degrees. Simultaneously, there was a microspike in power consumption recorded by the smart meter in the same room, lasting an equally brief duration, followed by an immediate return to baseline. It was the kind of event that would be filtered out by most analytical software as an insignificant outlier. Emily stared at it, zooming in on the timeline. It was insignificant, yet it was a deviation. Arthur's entire evening, according to his own logs and testimony, had been one of utter, undisturbed consistency. He had been in his study working, then streaming, completely sedentary. There was no explanation for a sudden brief drop in temperature or a microsurge in power. No window was opened, no door. No appliance was recorded turning on and off in the logs. It defied the perfect pattern. She brought it to Miller. "Detective," she began, her voice hesitant, "I found something in Vance's smart home logs. It's probably nothing, just a glitch, but... Miller leaned forward, his interest piqued. Tell me. Emily pulled up the anomaly on her screen. See here? 11:47 p.m. Temperature in the study briefly dipped by 0.2 degrees. And this a tiny power spike. For like 2.7 seconds. It's almost certainly a sensor error. The rest of the logs are flawless. Miller squinted at the screen. 2.7 seconds. He muttered, the words hanging in the air. And nothing else happened in the house at that exact moment? No lights flickered. No door opened, no appliance activated. Nothing in the logs, Emily confirmed. I cross-referenced everything. His computer was active, streaming was active, but nothing to explain this. It's an isolated event. Miller leaned back, his gaze distant. An isolated event in a perfectly orchestrated digital life. That's what bothers me, Emily. Arthur Vance is a man who accounts for everything. A man whose life is a symphony of routine. This isn't a glitch. This is a misplaced note. His mind raced, piecing together fragments. What if something did happen in those 2.7 seconds? Something he didn't want recorded. Something that caused a ripple effect in the environment without being directly logged. He remembered Arthur's meticulousness, the way he'd presented his alibi like a flawless diamond. Could this minute deviation, this barely detectable tremor in the digital fabric, be the only thing Arthur had truly overlooked? The one tiny detail that hinted at a brief, unexpected disruption to his otherwise unblemished timeline? Arthur, meanwhile, had just received a call from his lawyer, a brief, almost perfunctory conversation. Detective Miller's team has a few follow-up questions regarding your smart home data, Arthur. Minor discrepancies, they say. Probably nothing, just routine. I'll handle it, don't worry. Arthur had nodded, feigning indifference, but as he hung up, a cold knot formed in his stomach. Minor discrepancies. The words echoed in his mind. He'd been so careful. Every detail had been accounted for. What could they possibly find? He replayed the night in his head, searching for any misstep, any forgotten action. He had been so utterly, perfectly in control. But a seed of doubt had been planted, a tiny, insidious thought that began to sprout in the fertile ground of his carefully constructed confidence. Could something so insignificant, so utterly microscopic, truly be a flaw in his perfect alibi? Could a forgotten fraction of a degree, a phantom flicker of power, be the single thread that would unravel the entire beautiful tapestry he had woven? The thought, like a persistent splinter under the skin, burrowed deep into Detective Emily Hayes' mind. She stared at the printout, a single line of data amidst hundreds, showing a minuscule power fluctuation, a blip, a tremor in the otherwise unwavering digital heartbeat of Michael Thorne's meticulously controlled home. It was the kind of detail most would dismiss as background noise, an expected imperfection in any complex system. But Emily wasn't most people. Her instincts, honed over years of chasing shadows and untangling lies, screamed that this wasn't noise. This was a whisper. She remembered the way Michael had smiled, calm and collected, as he walked her through his smart home. Every light, every thermostat, every security camera, all synced, automated, and controlled with an almost surgical precision. He'd shown her the logs, the irrefutable digital proof of his presence, his routine, his alibi. And it had been perfect. Flawless. Too flawless, perhaps. Emily leaned back in her chair, the fluorescent hum of the precinct office a dull drone in the background. She pulled up the full report on Michael's smart home system. It was a high-end bespoke setup, installed by a specialized firm, but largely managed by Michael himself. He was, by all accounts, a man who liked control, who reveled in efficiency. His career in logistics, optimizing supply chains for multinational corporations, bespoke that same meticulous nature. He optimized everything, even his own life. She traced the line of data again. A momentary dip in power to a specific zone in his house, lasting less than a second, at precisely 11:37 p.m. The night Robert Sterling was murdered. The time Michael Thorne's smart alarm system registered him as being in his master bedroom, the temperature a consistent 70.2 degrees Fahrenheit, the ambient lighting a soft, pre-programmed glow. What could cause such a blip? A power surge? A momentary brownout? The city grid was stable that night. No reported outages. No other homes in the affluent neighborhood reported anything similar. Emily picked up her phone. "Get me Dr. Eris Thorne," she said to her desk sergeant, her voice cutting through the office din, the forensic tech specialist. "Tell him it's urgent." Dr. Eris Thorne arrived an hour later, a man whose casual attire, a band t-shirt and cargo shorts, belied a mind that could dissect the most complex digital architectures with ease. He carried a battered laptop bag and a perpetual air of mild amusement, as if the world's technological puzzles were merely delightful diversions. "Detective Hayes," he greeted, settling into the chair opposite her, his eyes already scanning the printout she pushed across the desk. "What marvel of modern technology has decided to misbehave now?" Emily pointed to the anomaly. "This, Michael Thorne's smart home system. It's part of his alibi. Everything else is pristine. But this flicker. It's tiny, Eris. Almost negligible. But it's there." Eris adjusted his glasses, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. He pulled out a small, high-powered tablet and began to type, accessing the encrypted data logs they'd legally acquired from Michael's system. The raw data scrolled across his screen, a dizzying array of timestamps, sensor readings, and system commands. He worked in silence for several minutes, his fingers flying across the virtual keyboard, occasionally muttering to himself. "Initial assessment," Eris finally said, looking up. "You're right. It's there. A microfluctuation in the power draw for the North Wing's climate control and lighting circuit. Lasted 0.4 seconds. Registered at 11:37 and 12 seconds p.m. The system logs automatically corrected it, routing power from a secondary capacitor bank. The end user, Michael, wouldn't have even noticed. Probably not even the smart home AI would flag it as an error worthy of notification." "So it's a glitch?" Emily pressed, a knot tightening in her stomach. If it was just a glitch, her gut feeling was wrong. The perfect alibi would remain unblemished. Eris shook his head slowly. "That's what's interesting. A glitch typically is random. A system hiccup, a momentary voltage drop across the entire circuit, or an isolated sensor malfunction. But this is too precise. It's localized to a specific circuit in a specific manner, and for a specific duration that is almost too clean for a random event." "Too clean?" Emily echoed, leaning forward. "Think of it like this, Detective," Eris explained, leaning back. "Most glitches are messy. They leave echoes, ripple effects. If it was a power surge, you'd see it across multiple circuits. If it was a component failure, you'd see a more prolonged disruption, or a cascade of errors. This is like a single, perfectly aimed flick of a switch, then immediately reset. It's almost as if it was intended to happen, then immediately and seamlessly covered up by the system's redundancies." Emily felt a jolt. "Intended? Or more accurately, a consequence of something intended," Eris clarified. "The system logs show the capacitor bank engaged immediately, yes. But they also show a minuscule, almost imperceptible delay in the main system re-engaging full power to that specific circuit after the capacitor kicked in. A delay of milliseconds. Not enough to cause a visible flicker of light, not enough to change the temperature by 1/10 of a degree. But enough, if you're looking, to suggest that the system wasn't just recovering from an anomaly, but compensating for a very specific, very brief, and very deliberate interference." Emily's mind raced. Michael Thorne, the man who optimized everything, the man who had a perfect alibi. Could he have optimized his way into a flaw? What kind of interference? Eris shrugged, his expression now serious. "That's the million-dollar question. It's not an external hack. No evidence of unauthorized access to the network. It's an internal event. Something within the system itself, or physically connected to that specific circuit, caused that momentary power disruption. And the system was programmed to immediately correct for it, making it invisible to the casual observer. So someone or something briefly diverted power from that specific circuit?" Emily mused, thinking aloud. "For less than half a second?" "Precisely," Eris confirmed. "And the system, designed by Michael himself to be incredibly robust and redundant, did exactly what it was supposed to do. It compensated instantly. It's like a car with a perfect suspension system hitting a tiny pothole. You barely feel it, but the suspension did react. This system reacted. The implications were staggering. If this wasn't a random glitch, then it was either an incredibly sophisticated act of sabotage by an unknown party, or Michael Thorne himself had perhaps unwittingly created this tiny ripple in his own digital pond. But why? Why would he intentionally, or as a consequence of his actions, cause such a minute disruption in his own system, especially when he was trying to establish an unassailable alibi? Eris, Can you tell me what specific devices are on that circuit? Emily asked, her voice low. Eris typed again. Okay, that circuit powers the master bedroom's integrated lighting system, the smart thermostat, the bedside charging ports, and a small dedicated server rack in his walk-in closet. That's where his personal smart home hub is located, separate from the main house server. It's a custom setup, very advanced. A server rack in his walk-in closet. Emily pictured Michael's pristine, minimalist bedroom. The walk-in closet, she recalled, had been just as immaculate, organized with an almost clinical precision. Why a separate server rack there? Most smart homes route everything through a central hub in a utility room or basement. He likes to keep his personal data close, I guess, Eris offered, sensing her unspoken question. Some people are paranoid about privacy, even from their own smart home integrators. He probably wanted complete control over his personal devices and certain aspects of his home automation, keeping them off the main network. Emily felt a cold dread begin to spread. Michael Thorne wasn't just meticulous. He was obsessive. He engineered his life, his home, his alibi with surgical precision. And now, a single flicker, a ghost in the machine, suggested that his very attempt at perfection might be his undoing. The separate server rack in his closet. What if that wasn't just about privacy but about control? What if it was designed to allow him to manipulate specific aspects of his environment, precisely and without leaving a trail on the main system? Eris, I need you to dive deeper, Emily instructed, her gaze fixed on the anomaly on the screen. I need to know everything about that specific circuit, that server rack, and any unique programming Michael might have implemented. I need to know what kind of action could cause that specific brief power draw, that momentary dip, and why the system was so perfectly poised to correct it. Eris nodded, his eyes alight with the challenge. This is fascinating, detective. Most people try to hide their tracks. Michael Thorne seems to have built a digital fortress, so complex and self-correcting that even a tiny, deliberate ripple is immediately smoothed over. The question isn't just what caused it, but what purpose it served. Because if it was a consequence of his actions, then that consequence, however small, might be the single thread that leads us to the truth. Emily stood up, walking to the window overlooking the city lights. The sprawling metropolis, full of secrets and shadows. Michael Thorne had believed he was above it all, a master weaver of his own reality, crafting an alibi so seamless, so intricately detailed, that no one could possibly penetrate it. But he had forgotten one crucial truth. Even the most perfect tapestry, when pulled tight enough, can reveal a single misaligned thread. And that thread, however fine, could unravel everything. The idea that Michael had created an alibi so perfect, so automated, that it inadvertently recorded the very moment of its own manipulation, was a chilling thought. It wasn't a flaw in the system. It was a flaw because of the system, a consequence of his own genius, his own obsessive need for control. And Emily Hayes was determined to follow that thread, wherever it led. The game, she realized, had just begun. The game, she realized, had just begun. Emily Hayes felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold, clear focus settling over her. Her initial frustration had morphed into a fierce determination. Michael's alibi wasn't just good. It was a masterpiece of digital orchestration. A symphony of perfectly timed automated actions designed to place him hundreds of miles away while his life, his home, his very presence continued uninterrupted. But that was precisely the problem. Nobody was that hands-off. Not Michael Thorne. Emily knew Michael's reputation long before she met him in that sterile interrogation room. He was a legend in certain tech circles, a savant of system architecture, a man whose control over his digital life bordered on the obsessive. He didn't just build systems, he lived through them. Every aspect of his existence, from his automated coffee maker to his complex investment algorithms, was meticulously managed by a network of his own design. He thrived on certainty, on precision, on absolute command. And that, Emily now understood, was his fatal flaw. A man like Michael Thorne, who meticulously crafted a digital empire to manage his every whim, would never truly relinquish control, not even for a moment. Especially not during a period of such critical importance as the time of a murder he was alleged to have committed. His alibi was too perfect, too autonomous. It screamed of a system designed to run itself, but Emily's gut, backed by her understanding of human nature and Michael's specific brand of genius, told her he couldn't have resisted checking in. He would have needed to. She went back to her office, the fluorescent lights humming a dull counterpoint to the buzzing in her mind. The mountain of data previously dismissed as irrelevant, as merely supporting Michael's flawless alibi, now held a new sinister potential. She pulled up the case files again, specifically focusing on the digital forensics reports. The sheer volume was staggering. Server logs, network traffic data, smart home telemetry, financial transaction records, social media activity, encrypted communications, all meticulously cataloged, all seemingly pointing to an absent Michael Thorne. "Okay, Michael," she muttered to the empty room, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "Let's see just how perfect you really are." Her new hypothesis was simple. Michael's system was designed to simulate his routine presence, to generate a digital footprint consistent with the man going about his day, even when he was physically elsewhere. The flaw wouldn't be in a failure of this system, but in an unnecessary intervention by its creator, a human touch where there should have been none. She began by isolating the critical window, the hours leading up to, during, and immediately after the murder of David Miller. Within this time frame, Michael's automated systems had performed flawlessly. His smart home had adjusted thermostats, his security cameras had logged routine scans, his personal server had executed scheduled backups, and his online profiles had shown activity consistent with his usual patterns, all originating from the remote location of his alibi. It was a digital ghost, perfectly mimicking its master. But what if, Emily pondered, Michael had done something outside of the automated script? Something small, almost subconscious, driven by his inherent need to verify, to control, to know? He wouldn't have risked a blatant login or a significant system override. That would have shattered the illusion. But what about a whisper? A digital breath? She contacted her lead forensic analyst, a brilliant but perpetually overwhelmed young man named Kevin Chen, whose office was usually a disaster zone of monitors and caffeine cups. "Kevin, I need you to go back through Michael Thorne's digital footprint for the Miller case," she instructed, her voice devoid of any doubt. "I don't want to see what his automated systems did. I want to see what he did. Manually. Any interaction, no matter how small, that wasn't part of the pre-programmed routine." Kevin sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Detective Hayes, we've been over this. His remote access logs from his alibi location are clean. Everything else is automated system activity. We found no evidence of him manually overriding or interacting with his home network in a way that suggests direct involvement." "I'm not looking for direct involvement in the traditional sense, Kevin," Emily clarified, leaning forward. "I'm looking for an anomaly of perfection. Michael Thorne is a control freak. He built that system to run flawlessly, yes, but he also built it to be monitored, to be checked. I want every single data packet, every micro timestamp, every IP address origin that deviates even slightly from the known automated routines. Look for manual pings, unscheduled diagnostics, even a simple, direct request for a data stream that isn't part of the regular flow. Anything that suggests Michael, the human, was actively observing or verifying his system, rather than passively letting it run." Kevin's eyes, usually glazed over from endless lines of code, sharpened. He understood the nuance. It wasn't about finding a mistake in the alibi, but finding an unnecessary confirmation of it. A flicker of human doubt in a machine-perfect world. The next few days were a blur of caffeine and code for Emily and Kevin. They pored over terabytes of data, filtering out the constant hum of automated activity. It was like searching for a single unique grain of sand on an endless beach. Michael's system was a fortress of digital perfection. Every log entry, every data transfer, every network handshake designed to blend seamlessly into the narrative of an absent, yet digitally present individual. Hours turned into days. Emily felt the weight of the investigation pressing down on her, the skepticism of her colleagues, the growing impatience of the DS office. Was she chasing a ghost? Was her theory just a desperate attempt to find a crack where none existed? Then late one night, a notification pinged on Emily's screen from Kevin. It was a single line of code, an obscure entry buried deep within a secondary server log, one that primarily handled metadata and system health checks. 20XX, XX, XX 23 hours 17 minutes and 42.345 seconds, IP, XXX, 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 user, Michael Thorne underscore, action, sensor target, front underscore sensor, status, success, method, direct. Emily stared at it, 23:17, 11:17 p.m. That was precisely 10 minutes after the estimated time of death for David Miller. The IP address traced back to a VPN server, which then routed to a satellite internet provider in the remote area where Michael claimed to be. All consistent with his alibi location. But the method, direct unravel, was the crucial detail. Michael's automated security system had a pre-programmed schedule for checking all sensors every 15 minutes. A direct underscore call was a manual targeted query, bypassing the automated schedule. It was a human hand reaching out specifically to one sensor, the front entry motion sensor. The very sensor that would have detected someone entering or exiting the house. It was tiny, insignificant on its own, a single query in a sea of millions. But it was manual. It wasn't part of the automated routine. It wasn't Michael's system passively reporting. It was Michael actively asking, why would a man hundreds of miles away, who had meticulously crafted a system to report everything he needed to know, suddenly make a manual, direct query to a single motion sensor, 10 minutes after a murder had occurred at his home? It wasn't a system glitch. It wasn't an automated check. It was a specific, conscious action. It was Michael Thorne, the obsessive controller, checking to see if anyone had entered or left his property, at the exact moment he should have been completely detached, passively relying on his perfect alibi. He wasn't just aware of the system. He was engaging with it, in a way that betrayed a heightened state of alert, a need for immediate specific information. He wasn't just letting his digital ghost roam. He was peering over its shoulder, guiding its gaze. The perfect alibi wasn't flawed because it failed. It was flawed because Michael Thorne's need for control was so absolute, so ingrained that he couldn't resist. He had to know. He had to verify. And in doing so, he left a single digital fingerprint that screamed of active participation, of a conscious mind assessing the immediate aftermath of an event, rather than a passive observer hundreds of miles away. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a crack. It was the leverage she needed. The alibi wasn't broken, not yet, but its perfection had been shattered. Now she had to figure out what Michael Thorne was so desperately trying to confirm, and what that confirmation truly meant. The game had just escalated. The game had just escalated. Jessica felt a cold dread seep into her bones, a sensation far more chilling than any direct accusation. Michael Thorne wasn't trying to break her alibi. He was trying to validate a suspicion, to turn its very strength against her. The perfection wasn't a shield. It was a target. She replayed their conversation, every nuance, every flicker in his eyes. He hadn't asked about her whereabouts, not directly. He'd asked about details of her alibi, the kind of minutiae that only perfect recall or perfect fabrication could provide. And then, that chilling question about the coffee, the seemingly innocuous detail that had thrown her off balance. He wasn't looking for a crack. He was looking for a seam in the fabric, a place where two perfectly aligned pieces might actually be subtly misaligned. Her mind raced back to that night. David Miller dead. Her miles away at Emily's watching a terrible rom-com eating takeout. Every detail had been meticulously constructed, not by her, but by the circumstances themselves. She had genuinely been there. Her alibi was ironclad because it was true. So what could Michael be trying to confirm? What hidden variable could he be pursuing that would unravel a truth? She needed to get inside his head to understand his precise line of inquiry. What was the specific data point, the one piece of information, that he was so desperate to verify? It wasn't just any flaw. It was a specific flaw, one he suspected existed within the very framework of her unassailable story. The first thing she did was revisit the timeline. Not her own, but Michael's. She knew his office was downtown, close to the precinct. She knew he often worked late. She had paid attention, not out of malice, but out of a need to understand her adversary. He was methodical, relentless. He wouldn't chase a phantom. He had something. That night, the night David died, her alibi was solid. She had left her office at 6:30 p.m., driven directly to Emily's apartment, arriving around 7:15 p.m. They'd ordered Chinese food, watched the movie, and she'd left Emily's at 11:30 p.m., arriving home just after midnight. David Miller had been found dead around 8 a.m. the next morning, but the coroner's estimated time of death placed it between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. She was with Emily the entire time, but Michael wasn't questioning her presence at Emily's. He was questioning something else. The coffee. She tried to remember the coffee. She and Emily had made a pot of coffee after the movie, around 11 p.m., to help them stay awake for the credits. It was a small detail, one she hadn't even consciously registered until Michael brought it up. Why the coffee? Unless Michael Thorne had a way to verify the existence or absence of that specific pot of coffee at that specific time. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. It was absurd. How could he possibly know about a pot of coffee made in Emily's private apartment? Unless he wasn't talking about the coffee she drank. Her mind clicked a terrifying realization. He wasn't asking about her coffee. He was asking about his, or someone else's. She remembered now. David Miller had been a creature of habit. Every night, without fail, he would stop at the same coffee shop, the Daily Grind. On his way home from work around 6:45 p.m., he'd get a large black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He did it so consistently it was practically a ritual. Could Michael be trying to confirm if David had broken that ritual on the night he died? If David hadn't bought his coffee, perhaps because he was already dead, or because he was somewhere else doing something unexpected, but what did that have to do with her alibi? The connection was tenuous, yet unsettling. If David had skipped his coffee ritual, it might indicate an altered timeline for him. But Jessica was with Emily. She couldn't have influenced David's coffee habits, unless Michael believed she could. She needed to investigate the Daily Grind. It was a long shot, a desperate guess, but it was the only lead she had to understand Michael's fixation on coffee. She couldn't just walk in there and ask about David Miller. That would be too obvious, too incriminating. She needed a subtle approach. The next morning, Jessica decided to take a detour on her way to work. She drove past the Daily Grind. It was a small, independent coffee shop, bustling with the morning rush. She parked a block away and watched. The same barista, a young man with a distinctive tattoo on his arm, seemed to be working the counter, just as he usually did. David had always complimented his latte art. She knew she needed to get closer, to somehow glean information without raising suspicion. She couldn't risk Michael Thorne finding out she was investigating his investigation. That afternoon she made a calculated move. She called Emily. "Hey Em, random question for you," Jessica began, trying to keep her voice light, casual. "Remember that night when we watched Love Happens Like That?" "Oh God, don't remind me," Emily groaned playfully. "My eyes still haven't recovered." "Right? But listen, after the movie when we made that coffee, do you remember what kind it was? I'm trying to recreate a blend I really liked, and I can't quite place it." Jessica knew the question was flimsy, but she needed to subtly reinforce the coffee detail in Emily's mind, just in case Michael ever asked her. "Coffee? Oh yeah, the emergency stash," Emily replied, sounding like she was rummaging through her memory. "It was that dark roast I got from the organic market." "Why?" "Just trying to remember," Jessica said, feigning mild disappointment. "Thanks, Em. Talk soon." She hung up, a knot tightening in her stomach. That was one angle covered. Emily's memory of the coffee was consistent with Jessica's. But that still didn't explain Michael Thorne's interest. He wasn't asking about their coffee. He was asking about the coffee, the one that mattered. David's coffee. Jessica decided on a bolder move. She would go to the Daily Grind herself. Not to ask questions but to observe and perhaps to plant a seed. The following day, she arrived at the coffee shop just before David's usual time. She ordered a simple black coffee, trying to blend in. The barista with the tattoo was there. She watched him, studying his routine, the way he interacted with regulars. It was clear he knew many of them by name, by their usual order. He was good. Too good. She noticed a small help wanted sign taped to the counter. Part-time evening shifts. An idea sparked. It was risky, incredibly so, but it might give her the access she needed. If she could work there, even for a few shifts, she might overhear something, see something, or even find a way to discreetly check old sales records. She filled out an application, using a slightly altered version of her resume, emphasizing customer service experience from years ago. She used a different email address, a burner phone number. She couldn't risk any direct link back to her. She introduced herself as Jane Smith, a temporary name for a temporary mission. A few days later, she got a call for an interview. The manager, a harried woman named Carol, was desperate for help. Jessica, with her polished demeanor and quick wit, easily charmed her way into a few evening shifts. Her first shift was scheduled for the following week. The anticipation was excruciating. Every passing hour felt like a ticking clock. She was stepping into the lion's den, directly into the potential nexus of Michael Thorne's investigation. If he had indeed been checking David Miller's coffee habits, he would have spoken to the people who worked there. Perhaps he had already gleaned whatever crucial piece of information he was looking for. During those days, she also started paying more attention to Michael Thorne. She noticed his car, a dark sedan, parked a few blocks from her office on 2 separate occasions. He wasn't following her, not directly, but he was surveilling her movements. He was building his case piece by agonizing piece. The game was no longer just about her alibi. It was about her entire life, her routines, her patterns. Her first shift at the daily grind was a Saturday evening. The shop was quieter than the mornings but still steady. The tattooed barista, whose name she learned was Kyle, was training her. He was friendly, chatty, and seemed completely oblivious to the undercurrents of the situation. "So you're new around here, Jane?" Kyle asked, showing her how to operate the espresso machine. "Just moved to the city looking for something part-time," Jessica lied smoothly. "This place seems nice." "It's all right," he shrugged. "We get some real characters. You learn their orders, their stories. It's kinda cool. Any regulars I should know about?" she asked, trying to sound genuinely curious. Kyle rattled off a few names, describing their usual drinks. Jessica listened patiently, waiting for a specific name to surface. It didn't. She spent the next few hours learning the ropes, making coffees, cleaning up. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. She was looking for anything out of place, any record, any conversation that might point to David Miller or Michael Thorne. She noticed the POS system, a modern tablet-based setup. Stored sales data, of course. Could she access it? Probably not without manager permissions. Around 8 p.m., a man walked in, a familiar face from the precinct. Jessica instantly recognized him as Detective Miller's partner, Detective Rodriguez. He ordered a black coffee just like David used to. He seemed preoccupied, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for someone. He didn't recognize Jessica, who was wearing a uniform and a name tag that read Jane. She served him, her heart pounding. "Anything else for you, Detective?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. He shook his head, took his coffee, and left. He hadn't asked about David, hadn't mentioned anything. But his presence here, at David's regular spot, felt significant. Was he continuing David's ritual, or was he also investigating? As her shift continued, Jessica kept her ears open. She heard Kyle talking about a strange customer who had been asking a lot of questions a few weeks prior. "Real intense guy," Kyle said to another coworker. "Kept asking about specific times, if we remembered anyone out of the ordinary on certain evenings, especially around closing. Like, who pays that much attention?" Jessica froze internally. "What kind of questions?" she asked, trying to sound offhand while wiping down the counter. "Just, did anyone seem stressed? Or did anyone leave something behind? Like we're a lost and found for personal dramas," Kyle scoffed. And he kept asking about the regulars. If anyone had changed their routine, it was Michael Thorne. It had to be. He had been here. He had been asking about changes in routine, about anything out of the ordinary. He wasn't just looking for David Miller's coffee habit. He was looking for any deviation, any anomaly that could disrupt the perfect, predictable flow of life that would usually allow an alibi to stand unquestioned. Jessica felt a surge of fear mixed with a strange sense of clarity. Michael Thorne wasn't trying to prove she wasn't at Emily's. He was trying to prove that something else happened, something so subtle, so seemingly insignificant, that it would only become a flaw when viewed through the lens of perfect alignment. He was looking for the missing piece, the one that would make her perfect alibi, not a truth, but a cleverly constructed deception. And she knew with terrifying certainty that he was getting closer. He wasn't looking for a lie. He was looking for the truth that contradicted her truth. The game had just taken a far more sinister turn. The game had just taken a far more sinister turn. Sarah felt it like a cold hand closing around her throat, even as she sat across from Detective Miller in the brightly lit interrogation room. His gaze, once merely analytical, now held a glint of something sharper, something that suggested he had seen through the layers of her meticulously constructed reality. She had built her alibi like a fortress, each stone placed with precision, each detail double-checked, triple-checked. It was impenetrable. It was perfect. or so she had believed. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Sarah forced herself to breathe evenly, to keep her expression neutral, a mask of weary cooperation. Inside, her mind was a whirlwind, replaying every interaction, every word exchanged, searching for the crack she must have missed. Where could he possibly be looking? What truth could contradict her truth? Miller finally leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his hands clasped. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he pushed a folder across the table toward her. It wasn't a thick file, but rather a slim, unassuming manila folder. The very simplicity of it sent a shiver down her spine. No dramatic reveal, no accusatory tone, just a quiet, almost apologetic gesture. "Sarah," he began, his voice calm, "we've been looking very closely at your movements, your statements. Everything you've given us has been consistent, remarkably so. Your alibi for the night David was killed. It's thorough. The GPS data from your car, the confirmed satellite internet connection from the cabin, the timestamp logs from the forum you mentioned. It all paints a very clear picture of you being exactly where you said you were." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing her to feel a fleeting sense of relief before cruelly snatching it away. "Almost," he added, his eyes locking onto hers. "Almost perfect." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment she had dreaded, the moment where the illusion began to fray. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "What do you mean? Almost, detective?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, betraying none of the terror that was beginning to coil in her gut. Miller opened the folder and slid a single photograph across the table. It was a close-up shot, slightly blurry, of a beautiful, intricate moth. Its wings were a rich, velvety black, edged with a delicate silver filigree, and its antennae were feathery and complex. It was the shadowwing moth, precisely the image she had uploaded to the rare entomology forum that night, at precisely 11:47 p.m., confirming her presence at the remote cabin in the Appalachian foothills. "This is the photograph you uploaded, correct?" Miller asked, his finger tapping gently on the image. Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the moth. It was a stunning creature, and she remembered the thrill of capturing its image, knowing it would serve as an irrefutable timestamp. Yes, it was an incredible sight. They only emerge under very specific conditions. "Indeed," Miller said, a subtle shift in his tone, a new edge that she hadn't heard before. "You mentioned that in your initial statement. A rare nocturnal moth, only active when the moon is just so, and the temperature drops to a certain degree, and the humidity is perfect. A truly unique event, perfect for confirming your isolated location." He paused again, his eyes unwavering. "We consulted with Dr. Evelyn Reed, a leading expert in lepidopterology from the State University. She's spent decades studying these creatures, specifically the Appalachian subspecies of the shadowwing." A faint tremor ran through Sarah. She had done her research. She had picked the shadowwing moth precisely because its rarity and specific conditions for emergence made it such a powerful, undeniable marker. What could an expert possibly say to contradict something so fundamentally factual? "Dr. Reed was quite fascinated by your photograph," Miller continued, his voice still calm, but the words now felt like tiny, precise darts. "She confirmed it is indeed a shadowwing moth, a beautiful specimen, but she also pointed out something peculiar." He pushed another document across the table. It was a printed email, dense with scientific jargon, but a few lines were highlighted. Sarah's eyes scanned the text, her heart sinking with each word. "The shadowwing moth, as you correctly noted, is highly sensitive to environmental conditions," Miller recited, reading from the email. "However, the specific subspecies found in the Appalachian foothills, the Noctua umbra applicanus, which is clearly depicted in your photo, has a very distinct seasonal emergence pattern. According to Dr. Reed's extensive research, and corroborated by decades of field data, this particular subspecies is exclusively active during a narrow window in late spring to early summer. They complete their metamorphosis and emerge as adults between late May and early July. They are completely dormant in their pupal stage by mid-July, and do not re-emerge until the following spring." Sarah felt a cold dread spread through her veins, a creeping paralysis. She remembered the date of David's murder, mid-October. "Sarah," Miller said, his voice dropping slightly, "David was murdered on October 14th. Dr. Reed states unequivocally that it would be biologically impossible for a Noctua umbra applicanus to be flying, let alone photographed, on the night of October 14th in the Appalachian foothills. They simply wouldn't exist in their adult form at that time of year. The room seemed to spin. The air grew thin. She stared at the expert's email, then back at the photograph of the moth, then at Miller's unyielding gaze. Her mind raced, desperately searching for an explanation, an oversight, a scientific anomaly that could save her. But there was none. The facts were stark, immutable. Furthermore, Miller pressed on, oblivious to her internal crumbling, Dr. Reed also commented on the background foliage in your picture. Even though it's somewhat out of focus, she noted what appears to be nascent leaf growth, characteristic of early spring. Not the rich, deep greens of summer, and certainly not the vibrant reds, oranges, and browns of mid-autumn. He leaned back, his expression now one of profound disappointment, a subtle sadness. Sarah, the perfect alibi you constructed, the one built on such precise, unique conditions, it has a fundamental flaw. The creature you photographed, the very cornerstone of your proof of presence, could not have existed at that location at that time of year. The silence that followed was deafening, crushing. Her fortress, built with such care and cunning, had not been breached by force, but had simply dissolved, revealed to be a mirage by a single, undeniable scientific truth. She had accounted for technology, for timing, for isolation, but in her meticulous planning, she had overlooked the most basic, unchangeable law of nature. She had chosen a symbol of rarity and specific conditions, believing it made her alibi ironclad, but in doing so, she had inadvertently chosen a variable that exposed its greatest weakness. The photo, the timestamp, the satellite internet, all of it still stood. She had uploaded that photo from that cabin at that time, but the meaning of the photo had utterly changed. It no longer proved she was there observing a rare moth. It proved she was there staging evidence, or at the very least uploading old, misleading information. Her mind reeled. How could she have missed something so obvious, so fundamental? She had been so focused on the uniqueness of the event, the difficulty of replicating it, that she had ignored the seasonality. It was a detail so ingrained in the natural world, so self-evident to an expert, yet so easily overlooked by someone operating outside that specific field. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. He wasn't just looking for contradictions. He was looking for the truth that contradicted her truth, and he had found it in the most unexpected, devastating place. The perfect alibi was not just a lie. It was a flawed lie, a deception built on a fatal miscalculation. Miller watched her, patiently, letting the weight of his revelation settle. He didn't need to accuse her. The evidence, presented so calmly, spoke for itself. He had shattered her narrative, not with a hammer, but with a scalpel, finding the precise, tiny weakness that brought the entire structure crashing down. Sarah felt a surge of panic, raw and visceral. This wasn't just a setback. It was an existential threat. Her careful planning, her absolute conviction in her immunity, had been based on this unshakable alibi. Now it was not only shaken but utterly obliterated. Every other piece of evidence, every other detail she had carefully woven into her story, would now be viewed through the lens of this fatal flaw. Her credibility was gone. Her protection was gone. She looked at the moth in the photograph, its delicate wings mocking her. It was beautiful, deadly, and utterly damning. She had used nature as her shield, and nature had betrayed her. Miller cleared his throat, pulling her back from the abyss of her own thoughts. "So, Sarah," he said, his voice softer now, but with an underlying steel, "perhaps you'd like to tell us again about your evening on October 14th. This time, perhaps, without the shadow-wing moth." His words hung in the air, a direct challenge, an invitation to surrender. The game was no longer about deception. It was about survival. And Sarah knew with chilling certainty that she was losing. The ground beneath her feet had vanished, and she was falling into an abyss of her own making. The perfect alibi, designed to grant her freedom, had now become the very key to her undoing. The perfect alibi, designed to grant her freedom, had now become the very key to her undoing. An ice-cold dread, sharper than any winter wind, pierced through Emily. Her carefully constructed world, built on layers of foresight and meticulous planning, was cracking. She felt the tremors beneath her feet, the first fissures appearing in the bedrock of her certainty. Detective Miller's gaze, unblinking and knowing, was a physical weight, pressing down on her, exposing her vulnerability. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry, the taste of ash in her mouth. He had seen something, found something, something she had missed. The thought alone was enough to send a shiver down her spine, a premonition of disaster. "You're a meticulous planner, Miss Hayes." Miller's voice cut through the silence, calm, almost conversational, yet laced with an undeniable edge. Every detail accounted for. The remote cabin, the timing of the storm, the broken phone, even your sister's testimony. It's a work of art, really. Emily forced a smile, a brittle, unconvincing mask. "I don't know what you're implying, detective. I simply explain what happened. I was stranded, isolated." "Isolated," Miller repeated, a faint, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. "That's the word you used. Cut off from the world. No communication in or out. No movement, save for the necessities within the cabin. Is that correct?" "Yes," Emily affirmed, her voice a little too quick, a little too high. "The storm was terrible. Roads impassable. My phone was dead. I had no choice but to wait it out." Miller leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "And your vehicle, Miss Hayes? Your luxury SUV? Where was it during this period of isolation?" Emily blinked. "Parked, of course. Right outside the cabin. Covered in snow. It wasn't going anywhere." She felt a flicker of confusion. Why was he focusing on her car? It was irrelevant. A mere prop in her carefully staged alibi. "A beautiful vehicle," Miller continued, ignoring her dismissive tone. "Full of advanced technology. GPS, remote diagnostics, collision assistance, even a built-in cellular modem for its subscription services. Am I right?" A knot tightened in Emily's stomach. She had forgotten about that. The premium package she'd opted for when she bought the car. For emergencies. She rarely thought about it, assuming it was just for roadside assistance or tracking if the car was stolen. It had never crossed her mind as a liability. Most modern vehicles, especially high-end models like yours, are essentially mobile computers, Miller explained, as if reading her thoughts. They collect a vast amount of data, not just about engine performance or tire pressure, but about location, speed, even door open and close cycles. All transmitted wirelessly, often in real time, to the manufacturer or service provider. Emily felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, suffocating. She tried to maintain her composure, to find a flaw in his reasoning. "Even if that's true, detective, the storm. It cut off all service. My phone had no signal." "Ah, the storm," Miller said, a thin smile playing on his lips. "A convenient ally, wouldn't you say? But storms, Miss Hayes, are localized. And while they can disrupt cellular signals, vehicle telemetry systems often operate on different frequencies, or have more robust satellite uplinks. And even if a signal is temporarily lost, the data is usually cached and uploaded as soon as connectivity is restored." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. A silent guillotine descending. Emily's mind raced, trying to find an escape route, a logical counter-argument. But there was none. Her carefully constructed narrative of isolation was suddenly under siege, not by a witness, but by an unseen, unblinking electronic eye. "We obtained a warrant," Miller stated, his voice now devoid of any pretense of casualness, "for the full telemetry data from your SUV, covering the period of Tuesday evening through Thursday morning." He pushed a tablet across the table, its screen facing her. Emily's eyes darted to the screen. It displayed a map, overlaid with a bewildering array of lines, dots, and timestamps. A red line traced a path from her home to the cabin where it stopped. But then a new jagged blue line snaked away from the cabin, cutting through what looked like rural roads, then merging onto a highway. "This," Miller said, tapping the screen with a finger, "is your vehicle's GPS track. It shows you arriving at the cabin around 7 p.m. on Tuesday, just as you stated. It shows your vehicle stationary there throughout Tuesday night and most of Wednesday. Perfect so far. Your alibi holds." He paused, and Emily felt a flicker of desperate hope. Perhaps he was bluffing. Perhaps the data was incomplete. "However," Miller continued, his voice dropping slightly, "at precisely 4:17 p.m. on Wednesday, when you claimed to be completely isolated and stuck, your vehicle's ignition was engaged. The doors were unlocked, then locked. And then, Miss Hayes, your SUV left the cabin. It drove for approximately 3 hours and 45 minutes, covering a distance of just over 200 miles, before stopping for an hour and 20 minutes. Then it drove back, arriving at the cabin at 3:15 a.m. on Thursday morning. The words hit Emily like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. 200 miles. The exact distance to Michael's house, give or take a few detours. The time frame, it was all there. Her blood ran cold. She stared at the screen at the irrefutable blue line, a digital tether connecting her directly to the scene of the crime. The stop, Miller elaborated, his voice now a low, chilling whisper, occurred in a residential neighborhood, roughly 2 blocks from Michael Miller's address. The vehicle remained stationary there, ignition off, doors locked, for 79 minutes. Michael Miller was pronounced dead at 2 a.m. on Thursday, but the medical examiner estimates his time of death between 11 p.m. Wednesday and 1 a.m. Thursday. Your vehicle was parked within a stone's throw of his house, right in the middle of that window. Emily felt a wave of nausea. Her head spun. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She had been so careful, so utterly thorough. The phone, the storm, the remote location. How could she have overlooked this? The car. Her own car, a silent, relentless witness, had recorded her every move. What do you have to say about this, Miss Hayes? Miller's voice was sharp, cutting through her daze. Were you stranded at the cabin? Or were you driving a 400-mile round trip to visit Michael Miller? She tried to speak, but her voice was a strangled gasp. It's a mistake. The data must be wrong. My car. It was parked. I swear. The data is from the manufacturer's secure servers, Miss Hayes, Miller countered, his tone hardening. It's time-stamped, verified, and impossible to tamper with remotely. It's a precise, unbiased record of your vehicle's movements. Unless you're suggesting someone else drove your SUV. The question hung in the air, a trap. If she claimed someone else drove it, she would have to explain who and why they would take her car on a clandestine trip to murder Michael, only to return it to her cabin without her knowledge. It was a story no one would believe, especially given her earlier insistence on her isolation. It would only make her look more desperate, more guilty. No, she whispered, defeat heavy in her voice. No, I was alone. Then the data directly contradicts your alibi, Miller stated, a note of finality in his tone. It places your vehicle, and by extension you, at the scene of Michael Miller's murder during the exact window of his death. The perfect alibi, Miss Hayes, wasn't so perfect after all. It was a flaw, a glaring omission in your otherwise meticulous plan. You forgot about the unseen observer, the silent witness embedded in your own technology. He leaned back, his expression grim. Now let's talk about why you drove 200 miles through a storm to kill Michael Miller. Emily felt the walls of the interrogation room closing in tighter and tighter. The air was thin, her breath ragged. Her mind raced, searching frantically for an explanation. Any explanation that didn't condemn her. But there was none. The blue line on the screen, an undeniable digital truth, had shattered her world. The ground had indeed vanished, and she was falling into an abyss of her own making, dragged down by the very sophistication she once embraced. Her perfect alibi had not only failed, it had become the very instrument of her downfall, a digital noose tightening around her neck. The digital forensics team's report landed on Detective Miller's desk with the weight of a guilty verdict. Beside him, Detective Ramirez leaned in, eyes scanning the dense text, the complex timelines, and the damning discrepancies. The abyss of her own making wasn't just a metaphor. It was a labyrinth of data points Jessica had carefully constructed, only for it to betray her. She thought she was so clever, Miller murmured, tracing a line on the screen. Leaving her phone at home, connected to her Wi-Fi, scheduling those social media posts to go out at regular intervals throughout the evening. Even adjusting the thermostat and turning lights on and off remotely, all to simulate a normal night in. Ramirez nodded slowly. The smart home logs initially backed her up. Continuous Wi-Fi activity from her phone, intermittent light usage, temperature changes consistent with someone moving around. Her digital ghost was perfectly present. But the ghost had an Achilles heel. The report highlighted what the forensic specialists had dubbed the glitch in the matrix. Jessica had meticulously planned her digital alibi, but she had overlooked the subtle, often unseen background processes of her own sophisticated ecosystem. Look at this, Miller pointed, his finger hovering over a specific timestamp. Her smart home security system, the one she paid a fortune for, had passive infrared motion sensors in strategic locations. The one near her main entrance, the one she probably thought she had disabled or accounted for, recorded an outgoing movement at 7:17 p.m., a distinct human-sized thermal signature, moving out the door. Ramirez's eyes widened, but her phone's Wi-Fi connection never dropped. It stayed connected to her home network. Exactly, Miller confirmed. She left the phone behind, a digital anchor meant to keep her rooted at home. But she herself walked out that door. The motion sensor logged it. A tiny, almost imperceptible blip in the vast sea of data, but undeniable when isolated and analyzed. The report went deeper. While her phone was at home, a secondary, less obvious device, a high-end fitness tracker she wore on her wrist, had continued to log her movements. Jessica, in her elaborate scheme, had forgotten the pervasive nature of her own smart accessories. The tracker, with its built-in GPS and accelerometer, painted a completely different picture of those critical hours. From 7:17 p.m. to 9:45 p.m., when David was estimated to have died, the tracker showed a pattern of travel, a period of sustained activity away from her residence, and then a return. It even logged the specific route her car took, cross-referencing it with traffic data from that evening. She hadn't just left. She had traveled, covering a significant distance. She was so focused on creating a digital presence at home, Ramirez mused. She completely ignored the digital shadow she was casting everywhere else. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a crime of passion, an impulsive act. This was premeditated, meticulously planned, and then elaborately covered up. The level of cunning was chilling. Miller leaned back, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. Now we know she wasn't home. Now we know she was out. The question is, where was she and what was she doing? The fitness tracker data provided the answer to the where. It showed her tracker moving directly from her home address to the vicinity of David's apartment building. It didn't pinpoint her inside his apartment, of course, but the proximity was damning. It showed her arriving around 7:45 p.m. and leaving around 9:30 p.m., perfectly encapsulating the estimated time of death. The forensic team had also dug into her car's infotainment system. Modern vehicles, especially luxury models like Jessica's, often log every journey, every connection, every voice command. They found a deleted navigation history entry for David's address from that evening. Deleted but not gone. The data recovery specialists had pulled it back, pristine and undeniable. The system also logged her phone's Bluetooth connection, confirming her primary phone was not in the car during that trip, further corroborating that she had left it at home. Jessica had attempted to weave a web of digital presence, a tapestry of her mundane domestic life. But in her hubris, she had forgotten the tiny, independent threads that made up the fabric of her technologically saturated existence. The smart home's motion sensor, the fitness tracker's relentless logging, the car's silent witness, each a stitch unraveling her perfect alibi. The detectives now had a clear, undeniable timeline of Jessica's actual movements. The initial alibi, which had seemed so impenetrable, was now a gaping hole, revealing her deception in stark relief. They understood the mechanics of her attempted cover-up, and that understanding sharpened their focus. Every piece of evidence they had gathered, every witness statement, every detail from David's apartment, suddenly clicked into place with terrifying clarity. They revisited David's apartment. With the new timeline, the seemingly random details now screamed intent. The lack of forced entry, the undisturbed nature of the scene, the single glass on the coffee table. It all pointed to someone David knew, someone he trusted, someone he would willingly let into his home. Someone like Jessica. Ramirez picked up a small, almost invisible fiber from David's rug, something they had initially cataloged but not prioritized. Could this be from her? Miller nodded. Send it for urgent analysis. Everything takes on new significance now. We're not just looking for a killer. We're looking at a meticulously calculated act, followed by an equally calculated deception. The pressure on Jessica mounted, though she was unaware of the full extent of the digital net tightening around her. She still believed her alibi was holding, a fortress of data protecting her. But that fortress was crumbling brick by digital brick. Her confidence, which had been her shield, was about to become her greatest vulnerability. She had spent the days since David's death maintaining a facade of grief and concern, playing the role of the worried friend. She had even reached out to David's family, offering condolences, her voice carefully modulated to convey sorrow. Each interaction was a performance, designed to reinforce her innocence. But the detectives were no longer swayed by her act. They saw through the layers of her composure to the chilling calculation beneath. The digital evidence didn't just contradict her alibi, it painted a picture of a woman who had meticulously planned every step, every lie. It suggested a motive far deeper than a simple argument or misunderstanding. It spoke of a cold, deliberate act. Miller decided it was time to move. They had enough. More than enough. The digital forensics had provided the smoking gun, not in the traditional sense, but in the irrefutable record of her betrayal. Get a warrant, Miller instructed Ramirez, his voice firm, for her arrest. And a full search of her home, her car, her office. We need to find the physical evidence that corroborates everything the digital trail is telling us. Jessica was at her upscale apartment, sipping a glass of wine, staring out at the city lights. A faint smile played on her lips. The police had interviewed her, but they hadn't pressed her about her alibi. It had held. She was in the clear. The audacity of her plan had worked. She had outsmarted them. The ring of her doorbell shattered the tranquil evening. She frowned, checking her smart display. No one was expected. Her heart gave a sudden lurch, a primal warning she tried to dismiss. It was probably just a delivery, or a mistaken address. She opened the door, her composure momentarily slipping as she saw the two figures standing on her doorstep. Detective Miller, his face grim, and Detective Ramirez, holding a folded document. Jessica Hayes, Miller stated, his voice devoid of any previous politeness. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the murder of David Chun. The words hit her like a physical blow. The wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the polished floor, its contents spreading like a stain. Her carefully constructed world, her perfect illusion, imploded in that instant. Her eyes darted from Miller to Ramirez, a flicker of raw panic replacing her practiced calm. Arrest? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. But my alibi. Miller's gaze was unwavering, piercing through her facade. Your alibi, Miss Hayes, was a flaw. A beautiful, intricate flaw that led us straight to the truth. The cuffs clicked, cold and final, around her wrists. As they let her out, past her pristine, silent, smart home, the city lights seemed to mock her. The very technology she had used to weave her deception had become the threads of her undoing. The perfect alibi had not only failed, it had become the very instrument of her downfall, a digital noose tightening around her neck, pulling her into an abyss she had so meticulously dug for herself. The game was over. Or was it? The truth, the full, devastating truth, was still waiting to be unearthed. The truth, the full, devastating truth, was still waiting to be unearthed. Detective Miller watched Jessica across the interrogation room table, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished surface. Her composure, once a fortress, had begun to show hairline fractures. He placed a thick folder in front of her, its contents meticulously organized. Jessica, he began, his voice calm but firm, we've been through the initial statements. Your alibi, as you presented it, was impeccable. A smart home system, a digital fortress designed to track every movement, every power cycle, every locked door. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. But sometimes the very thing designed to protect you is the thing that betrays you. Jessica's eyes, though still defiant, flickered. She swallowed hard, a tiny tell Miller didn't miss. We accessed the full logs from your smart home system, Jessica, Miller continued, leaning forward slightly. Every sensor, every camera, every smart lock. It paints a very precise picture of that night. A picture, I might add, that doesn't quite align with your narrative. He opened the folder, revealing printouts and diagrams. At exactly 11:37 p.m., the system registered Michael's security passcode being entered, arming the perimeter alarms. This is consistent with him going to bed. The system then registered his smartwatch going into sleep mode at 11:45 p.m. All normal. All perfectly aligned with your story of being asleep in your guest room, completely separate from Michael. Miller pushed a specific document across the table. However, at 1:12 a.m., the smart thermostat in Michael's master bedroom registered a significant drop in temperature. Not a programmed one, Jessica. A manual override. Someone adjusted it to a chilling 58 degrees Fahrenheit. And then at 1:15 a.m., the smart blinds in that same room were manually opened, just enough to let in the sliver of moonlight you spoke of. Again, a manual override, not a scheduled event. Jessica's face remained carefully blank, but the muscle in her jaw twitched. Your alibi hinges on you being completely disconnected from Michael's side of the house, asleep in a room the system shows you entered at 10:30 p.m. and didn't leave until 7 a.m. the next morning, Miller pressed on. But here's where the perfect alibi becomes a flaw, Jessica. The smart home system, in its infinite precision, also logs every time a manual override is performed and how it's performed. And while the system shows no entry into Michael's room via the main door or the hallway, it does show a manual override of the smart thermostat and the smart blinds. And that override, Jessica, was performed not through Michael's personal smart device or voice command, but directly via the wall panel interface, inside Michael's bedroom. He paused, letting the full weight of his words sink in. The system records fingerprints, Jessica. It records touch patterns. And the pattern on that wall panel, the one that turned down the thermostat and opened the blinds in Michael's room at 1:12 a.m., matches yours. The silence in the room was deafening. Jessica's eyes, no longer defiant, were wide with something akin to panic. The carefully constructed facade crumbled. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. That's impossible." "Is it, Jessica?" Miller's voice was relentless. "The system logs show you did not leave your guest room. Yet, your fingerprints are on the wall panel in Michael's room at the exact time these manual overrides occurred. The only way that could happen is if you were in Michael's room. And the only way the system wouldn't register your entry is if you used a method that bypassed the standard sensors. Perhaps a hidden access point Michael himself installed, one not fully integrated with the broader security grid, a contingency for emergencies or for secrets." He watched her closely, seeing the fear finally break through. The system also showed a brief, anomalous power surge in Michael's study at 1:05 a.m., just minutes before the temperature drop. A surge consistent with a specific type of electronic device being plugged in and activated. A device not registered on the network. A device we now believe that was used to disable Michael's personal security camera feed, the one he kept pointed at his desk, just long enough for someone to do what they needed to do without being seen. And then it was unplugged, and the camera came back online, registering nothing amiss. Jessica pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly. "You don't understand," she choked out, her voice trembling. "You don't know what he was doing. You don't know who Michael really was." Miller leaned back, sensing a shift. "Then tell me, Jessica. Tell me who Michael really was. Because right now, the evidence points directly to you being in that room, manipulating his environment, and then returning to your guest room, creating an elaborate digital alibi while Michael lay dying." Her chest heaved. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow but of a desperate, cornered rage. Michael was a monster. She spat, the words laced with venom. He wasn't the successful, charming businessman everyone thought. He was a predator, a manipulator, and he was in deep, deeper than anyone knew. Miller raised an eyebrow. "In deep with what, Jessica?" "Debts," she almost screamed. "Gambling debts, shady deals, people he owed money to, dangerous people. He was bleeding us dry, draining our accounts, mortgaging everything we owned. He was building this smart home not for security but to control everything, to hide his tracks, to monitor me. He had secrets, dirty, ugly secrets, and he used that house, that system, to keep them buried." "What kind of secrets?" Miller pressed, his detective instincts tingling. This wasn't just a wife trying to deflect. There was genuine terror in her eyes. "He was involved with a group, a really dangerous group," she continued, her voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "They weren't just loan sharks, detective. They were organized. He was laundering money for them, using his company as a front. He thought he was smart, untouchable. But they were closing in. They knew he was skimming, playing both sides. They were going to make an example of him." Miller felt a chill. This was a new layer, one he hadn't anticipated. "And how do you know all this, Jessica?" "Because he told me," she confessed, her voice thick with despair. "He told me everything a few weeks before he died. He was terrified. He said they were watching the house, watching us. He told me they had ways of getting in, ways of making things look like accidents or like I did it." A cold dread settled in Miller's stomach. The perfect alibi was a flaw, not just for Jessica, but potentially for the real perpetrators. If Michael was involved with dangerous people, they could have exploited the very system he relied on. He said, Jessica choked out, her eyes locking onto Miller's. He said if anything happened to him, they would come for me. Or worse, for our son, David. He said they would make it look like a tragic accident or a domestic dispute gone wrong. He said they'd use the house against me. He said he'd left a failsafe, a way to expose them if he ever disappeared. A failsafe, Miller repeated, intrigued. He hid a drive, she sobbed, finally breaking down. A small encrypted drive with everything. Ledgers, names, locations. He said he kept it in a place only I would know to look. He said it was the only thing that could protect me after he was gone. Miller leaned forward again, his mind racing. Was this a desperate ploy? Or the horrifying truth? If Michael had powerful enemies, and if they knew about his smart home, they could have easily manipulated the system, framed Jessica, and made it look like a domestic murder. The manual overrides the fingerprint. Could Jessica have been coerced? Or worse, could the system itself have been compromised in a way even she didn't understand? Could Michael have intended for her to find the drive, knowing she would be the prime suspect, forcing her hand? Where is this drive, Jessica? Miller asked, his voice now devoid of accusation, replaced by a desperate need for answers. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, but with a flicker of something new. A desperate hope and a chilling fear. He said it was in the one place they'd never think to look. The place that was always his domain, but my secret garden. She took a shuddering breath. He said it was in the old, broken grandfather clock behind the loose panel in the living room. The one he always refused to fix. Miller's blood ran cold. The grandfather clock, a relic in their otherwise futuristic home, was a detail that had always struck him as odd. A perfect hiding spot, completely outside the smart home's digital reach. But if Michael had so many enemies, if he was so deeply entangled, then Jessica's perfect alibi wasn't just a flaw in her plan. It was a perfectly laid trap, a stage set by someone far more insidious, using the very technology designed for security as the ultimate weapon of deception. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. Detective Miller felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The initial satisfaction of cracking Clara's alibi had curdled into profound unease. The system wasn't just wrong. It had been made wrong. This wasn't a simple oversight or a miscalculation on Clara's part. This was deliberate, malicious engineering. He saw the threads of a larger tapestry, one woven with cunning and a chilling disregard for human life. He knew he was out of his depth. This required a specialist. He called Dr. Evelyn Reed, a renowned cybersecurity expert from the State Police's Digital Forensics Unit. Evelyn was a whirlwind of sharp intellect and precise movements, her mind a labyrinth of algorithms and network protocols. She arrived at the precinct, her expression serious as Miller laid out the anomaly of David's smart home system. Evelyn didn't just look for hacks. She looked for intent. She delved into the system logs, the firmware, the network traffic going back weeks, even months. What she found sent chills down her spine. The system hadn't been externally breached in the traditional sense. Instead, there was an embedded, sophisticated backdoor, a ghost in the machine that allowed for precise remote control of specific functions. It wasn't a crude hack. It was an elegant, almost artistic manipulation. It's like someone installed a hidden switch, Evelyn explained to Miller, pointing to lines of complex code on her tablet. This wasn't just remote access. It was administrative-level control, disguised as routine system updates or background processes. It allowed someone to override Clara's commands, to mimic her presence, to essentially puppet the house's responses while she was physically elsewhere. The system believed Clara was home because it was being told she was by a command structure it recognized as legitimate. But that legitimate command structure was actually a parasitic twin, a shadow system running in parallel, taking cues from the real system and then subtly altering its output. The crucial question was who had the knowledge, access, and motive to plant such a sophisticated trap? Evelyn managed to trace the initial installation point of this backdoor. It wasn't through a public network. It was injected directly, physically, into the system's main hub during its setup or a subsequent maintenance check. And the remote access points, though masked by layers of encryption and hops through various servers, eventually led back to a specific untraceable VPN. But that VPN had briefly connected to a known IP address months ago, during a period of unusual activity in David and Clara's home network logs. An IP address that belonged to a small, obscure tech consulting firm David had briefly considered for an upgrade, but ultimately rejected. A firm owned by Daniel, Clara's seemingly distraught brother, the man who had been her rock, her confidant, her fiercest defender. Miller felt a jolt. Daniel had always been a bit of a quiet genius, tinkering with electronics, dabbling in cybersecurity as a hobby. He'd even offered to help Clara set up her smart home system initially, before David insisted on a professional installation, deeming Daniel's skills insufficient. But Daniel had been there, during the initial setup, offering advice and supervision. And he had been over frequently for maintenance checks on Clara's computer, often lingering near the smart home hub, claiming to be optimizing the network. Miller revisited Daniel's statements, his demeanor. His grief had seemed genuine, but now viewed through this new lens, it felt practiced. Too perfect. He started digging into Daniel's past, his financial situation. It didn't take long to uncover a pattern of failed business ventures, mounting debt, and a simmering resentment towards David. David, the successful entrepreneur, who had always seemed to overshadow Daniel, to casually dismiss his ideas. David, who had once refused to invest in one of Daniel's revolutionary, but ultimately disastrous tech startups, indirectly leading to its collapse. There was also the matter of David's substantial life insurance policy, with Clara as the primary beneficiary. But if Clara were convicted of David's murder, the policy would be voided, or at the very least tied up in legal battles for years. However, Daniel, as Clara's closest living relative and David's brother-in-law, stood to gain significantly. If Clara were incapacitated, either by conviction or institutionalization, Daniel would likely gain control over her assets, which, after the sale of the house and other investments, would be considerable. It was a convoluted but chillingly logical motive. Daniel knew Clara's habits intimately. He knew her reliance on the smart home. He knew she would use it as her alibi, precisely because it was so robust, so trustworthy. He didn't just want David dead. He wanted Clara framed, eliminated from the picture, so he could step into the void, financially and perhaps even emotionally, as the savior of the family. He had meticulously crafted the perfect alibi for Clara, knowing full well it would eventually be exposed as the very instrument of her undoing. He had built the flaw into the design. He hadn't just predicted Clara's actions. He had engineered the very conditions that would lead her to them. Miller called Daniel in for further questioning, a casual tone masking the steel in his voice. Daniel arrived, looking tired but composed, still playing the grieving brother. Miller didn't waste time. He laid out the evidence piece by damning piece. The backdoor in the smart home, the untraceable VPN leading back to Daniel's defunct company, the financial woes, the deep-seated resentment, the pattern of maintenance visits. Daniel's composure began to fray. His eyes, usually placid, darted around the room. He initially stammered denials, blaming a disgruntled employee, a random hacker, anything but himself. But Miller kept pressing, detailing the intricate knowledge required to pull off such a sophisticated deception, the precise timing of the commands, the intimate understanding of Clara's daily routine, her precise movements captured by the system, even when she wasn't there. Only someone deeply embedded in their lives, someone who could observe and predict, could have executed it so flawlessly. You didn't just want David gone, did you, Daniel? Miller's voice was low, cutting through the silence. You wanted Clara to take the fall. You knew she'd rely on that smart home system. You built her alibi, knowing it would be her undoing. You turned her sanctuary into her prison. A flicker of something dark and cold passed through Daniel's eyes. The mask finally slipped. A chilling, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. David thought he was so smart, Daniel began, his voice surprisingly calm, devoid of emotion. He always looked down on me, dismissed my ideas. He took everything. My family's respect, my sister's attention. He even sabotaged my last startup, indirectly, by spreading rumors and withholding crucial contacts. He deserved to pay. He paused, then added, his gaze fixed on Miller, a predatory glint in his eyes. And Clara always chose him. Always. She needed to learn that perfect systems, just like perfect lives, can always be repurposed. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the weight of his chilling confession. The perfect alibi wasn't just a flaw. It was a meticulously crafted bomb, designed by the very person Clara trusted, set to explode with devastating precision. The true villain had been hiding in plain sight, a wolf in sheep's clothing, and the game indeed had just begun, and the final moves were about to unfold, revealing the full extent of a brother's twisted vengeance. Flowed with devastating precision. The true villain had been hiding in plain sight, a wolf in sheep's clothing, and the game indeed had just begun, and the final moves were about to unfold, revealing the full extent of a brother's twisted vengeance. The words echoed in Michael's mind. A brother's twisted vengeance. It landed with the weight of a meteor, shattering the last fragments of his reality. Daniel, his own brother. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, now coalesced into a horrifying mosaic. The subtle manipulations, the perfectly timed suggestions, the way Daniel had always seemed just a step ahead, guiding Michael's investigation down meticulously constructed rabbit holes. It wasn't coincidence, it was cunning. Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones, colder than any winter night. He thought back to Daniel's alibi for Sarah's murder. It had been bulletproof. Daniel was supposedly at a remote cabin miles away, engaged in a live-stream chess tournament, complete with timestamped chat logs and photos sent to their mutual friend Mark. Perfect alibi indeed. But Michael remembered something, a tiny nagging detail that had been dismissed as irrelevant at the time. Daniel, a connoisseur of fine coffee, always insisted on a specific, rare brand, Costa Rican dark roast. Michael had seen the distinctive red bag in Daniel's apartment, at their parents' old vacation home, even in Daniel's car once. Yet, when Michael had briefly visited the cabin during the initial investigation, he'd noticed a generic, supermarket brand of coffee by the machine. It was such a trivial detail, lost in the chaos of a murder investigation, but now it screamed. Why would Daniel, of all people, settle for cheap coffee when he was supposedly enjoying a peaceful, remote getaway? Then another image flashed. Daniel was a meticulous chess player, almost ritualistic about his equipment. His prized possession was an antique, hand-carved wooden chess set, passed down from their grandfather. The photos Daniel had sent to Mark, supposedly from the cabin, showing him relaxing and playing, featured a sleek, modern glass chess board. Michael had barely registered it then, assuming Daniel might have simply brought a different set. But Daniel never played on anything but the wooden board if he had a choice. It was a tell, a tiny, almost invisible crack in the facade of perfection. Daniel had fabricated the scene. The cabin photos were either old, staged, or taken from a different location entirely, meticulously edited to imply he was there. The live chess tournament? A pre-recorded interaction, a bot, or even just background noise while Daniel was elsewhere. The realization hit Michael with the force of a physical blow. The perfect alibi wasn't just flawed. It was a deliberate trap, constructed with such precision that its very perfection was its undoing. Daniel hadn't just had an alibi. He had built one, and in his arrogance, he'd left behind a signature, a tiny, almost imperceptible detail that only someone who knew him intimately could ever spot. Michael's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, then hesitated. Calling the police immediately felt right, but his brother, his own flesh and blood, was a master manipulator. He needed to be sure to have Daniel confess to understand the why. He had to confront him, alone. It was reckless, he knew, but the truth, raw and unvarnished, was a burning need. He drove to Daniel's apartment. The city lights blurred past, a kaleidoscope of false comfort. His mind raced, replaying every interaction, every casual remark, every shared memory with Daniel. Had it all been a lie? Had the rivalry, the perceived slights, festered into this monstrous plan? He arrived at Daniel's building, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, to compose the image of a calm, collected man, not a brother whose world had just imploded. He knocked. The door opened and Daniel stood there, a practiced smile on his face, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Michael, to what do I owe the pleasure? Came to celebrate the breakthrough in the Sarah case? I heard they're close to an arrest. His words, once comforting, now felt like venom. Michael stepped inside, his eyes scanning the familiar apartment, searching for any sign of the monster lurking beneath the surface. Daniel, we need to talk. About Sarah. About everything. Daniel's smile faltered, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He motioned to the couch. Of course. What's on your mind? You look like you've seen a ghost. I think I have, Michael said, his voice barely a whisper. He sat, leaning forward, his gaze locked onto Daniel's. The alibi, Daniel. Yours. For the night Sarah died. Daniel raised an eyebrow, a picture of feigned innocence. My alibi? What about it? It was solid. Mark confirmed everything. Mark confirmed what you showed him, Michael corrected, his voice gaining strength. The photos. The chess tournament. The cabin. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. But you weren't there, were you? Daniel's facade began to crack. His grip tightened on the whiskey glass. What are you talking about? Of course I was there. I told you I needed to get away, clear my head. The coffee, Daniel. Your Costa Rican dark roast. It wasn't at the cabin. Only generic coffee, Michael pressed, watching his brother's face intently. And your chess set. The antique one grandfather gave you. The photos you sent Mark showed a modern glass board. You never play on anything but the wooden one. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unspoken truths. Daniel's eyes narrowed, the warmth completely gone, replaced by a chilling emptiness. You've been digging, haven't you, Michael? Always the detective. Always looking for something that isn't there. It is there, Daniel. The flaw in your perfect alibi. You thought you'd covered every base, but you couldn't perfectly replicate every detail of your life. You left your signature, brother. Too tiny, almost invisible tells that only someone who knew you would ever notice. Michael stood, his voice rising. You weren't at that cabin. You were here. Or somewhere closer. Somewhere you could intercept Sarah. Daniel slowly placed his glass on the coffee table. The clink of glass against wood was the only sound in the suffocating silence. His expression morphed, shedding the last vestiges of the friendly brother, revealing the wolf beneath. Impressive, Michael. Truly. I thought I had accounted for everything. But then you always were the clever one, weren't you? His tone was laced with a venomous bitterness that sent shivers down Michael's spine. Why, Daniel? Why, Sarah? Why all of this? Michael demanded, his heart aching with a pain far deeper than fear. Daniel laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound that echoed in the quiet apartment. Why? You ask why? Because of you, Michael. Always you. The golden boy. The favored son. The one who could do no wrong. While I was always in your shadow, always second best. He paced, his movements agitated, his words spilling out in a torrent of long-suppressed rage. Do you remember Mom and Dad? Their accident? You were supposed to pick them up that night, Michael. You were too busy with your law school friends, your big dreams, your future. I was the one who found them. I was the one who had to live with that image, knowing if you had just been there, if you hadn't been so selfish, they might still be alive. Michael recoiled, the accusation a cruel twist of the knife. That's not fair. It was an accident. I was devastated too. Devastated. Daniel scoffed. You moved on. You built a career, a life. You even found Sarah, someone who saw your brilliance, your potential. I watched you, Michael. I watched you take everything I ever wanted, everything I felt I deserved. Sarah, she was just a means to an end, a way to show you what it feels like to lose something precious, something you love, because of your own supposed flaw. You killed her to punish me? Michael whispered, horrified. No, not just to punish you, Daniel corrected, a chilling gleam in his eyes. To expose you. To make you see that your perfect life, your perfect judgment was nothing but an illusion. I wanted you to unravel, to question everything just like I did after Mom and Dad died. And the alibi? That was the masterpiece. A perfect alibi, so perfect it would eventually be revealed as a flaw. A testament to my superior intellect, and your ultimate failure to see what was right in front of you. Daniel lunged, not at Michael, but towards a dark wooden cabinet in the corner. Michael reacted instantly, tackling him before he could reach whatever lay within. A desperate struggle ensued, furniture crashing, the air filled with the grunts of two brothers locked in a brutal final confrontation. Michael, fueled by adrenaline and righteous fury, managed to pin Daniel against the wall. It's over, Daniel, Michael gasped, his voice hoarse. It's all over. Just then the apartment door burst open. Jessica stood there, her face etched with concern, followed by two uniformed officers. Michael must have instinctively called her before confronting Daniel. A desperate, subconscious plea for backup. Daniel, seeing the police, his face contorted in a snarl of defeat and rage, finally went limp. The game was truly over. In the aftermath, the truth unfolded in agonizing detail. Daniel confessed. his twisted narrative of resentment and vengeance chilling the hearts of everyone who heard it. He had meticulously planned Sarah's murder, not out of hatred for her, but as the ultimate act of psychological warfare against Michael. The perfect alibi was designed to be eventually discovered, a final damning piece of evidence that would prove Daniel's intellectual superiority and Michael's blindness. He wanted Michael to be the one to uncover his brother's dark secret, to live with the knowledge that his own sibling was a monster he failed to see. Michael stood in the sterile corridors of the police station, the weight of his brother's betrayal a crushing burden. Jessica placed a comforting hand on his arm. "You did it, Michael. You found the truth." But the victory felt hollow. The man he had arrested wasn't just a killer. He was his brother, a victim of his own festering bitterness, consumed by a hatred Michael never knew existed. The perfect alibi, a construct of meticulous deception, had ultimately been his undoing, unraveling not because of a mistake, but because it carried the indelible, flawed signature of the man who created it. The case of Sarah's murder was finally closed, but for Michael the scars would remain. He had brought a killer to justice, but at the cost of his family, his innocence, and a piece of his own soul. The perfect alibi had indeed been a flaw, a testament to how even the most brilliant minds can be blinded by their own hubris, and how the pursuit of vengeance can twist love into something unrecognizable, leaving behind a trail of devastation that forever changes the lives of those caught in its wake.